That's the fatso we have to put up with." Those were the exact words my daughter, Vanessa Hayes, shouted across the grand ballroom on her wedding night. Her voice carried over the clinking glasses and the orchestra's polished melody, slicing through the air like a blade. 200 guests, dressed in satin gowns and tailored tuxedos, turned their eyes toward me. For a moment, I felt as though every chandelier above the Grand Metropolitan Ballroom in Charlotte, North Carolina, had spotlighted only me, the invisible woman, the embarrassment, the mother who was never meant to be seen. Laughter erupted, cruel, elegant laughter, echoing from the marble walls and gilded ceilings. I stood frozen, clutching a small, carefully wrapped gift in my trembling hands. My cheeks burned with humiliation. In front of her new husband's prestigious family, Vanessa had stripped me of dignity, treating me as if I were an animal that had wandered into the most exquisite event of the year. My name is Margaret Hayes, but for decades I have lived like a ghost, scrubbing corporate offices in the dark hours before dawn, saving pennies, wearing thrift store clothes, and taking 3 buses just to make it home. Yet in that instant of deepest shame, everything began to shift. As the guests continued to mock, one man suddenly stopped laughing. Richard Caldwell, the groom's father, a distinguished figure in a bespoke charcoal suit, stared at me with a strange intensity. His glass of champagne nearly slipped from his fingers. He took a step forward, then another, his eyes narrowing in disbelief, as if he had just seen a ghost rise from the shadows of his own past. "Wait," he murmured, his voice low but sharp enough to pierce through the chatter. "Aren't you my new boss?" The laughter around us faltered. Conversations stuttered into silence. And in that electrifying pause, as 200 pairs of eyes turned from ridicule to confusion, the life I had concealed for 3 decades teetered on the edge of revelation. Because the truth was far more dangerous and far more powerful than anyone in that ballroom could have imagined. I was 66 years old, but in that instant, as Richard Caldwell's eyes locked on mine, I felt the weight of 30 years of silence pressing down on me. His recognition was not a mistake. He had seen my face before, not here, not in this ballroom, but in boardrooms, in contract negotiations, in corporate filings signed under the name that no one in my family knew belonged to me, MJ Whitmore. But how could I ever explain that story to a room full of people who had always assumed I was nothing more than a cleaner? After my husband's tragic death, when Vanessa was only 12, life became a series of long nights and endless sacrifices. I scrubbed offices while other mothers tucked their children into bed. I carried industrial cleaners and buckets while others carried handbags and designer coats. I came home smelling of bleach, with hands cracked and raw, so that Vanessa could have new notebooks for school, shoes that didn't squeak, and, at least for a while, the illusion of a normal life. She hated me for it. Vanessa grew ashamed of my uniform, ashamed of the way my shoes squealed across polished granite floors. She wanted glittering malls, not secondhand stores. She wanted to walk into the world with pride, not with a mother who smelled like ammonia and sweat. And though her contempt sliced me open again and again, I said nothing. Because while she was busy despising me, I was busy building something she could never have imagined. Every night, as I pushed my mop down silent hallways, I listened. Executives spoke freely when they thought no one important was around. They discussed mergers, risks, hidden debts, and opportunities. They whispered about insider information, believing the cleaning lady invisible, incapable of understanding. But I was listening, always listening. It started with $50. 50 I tucked away from groceries. 50 I invested in a stock I overheard 3 vice presidents debating after midnight. That 50 grew into 100, then 500. And with every dollar, I grew hungrier, bolder. My tiny 2-bedroom apartment became stacked with discarded financial journals and crumpled Wall Street newspapers fished out of recycling bins. I taught myself the language of the powerful: ROI, equity, leveraged buyouts, words that had once felt like foreign magic spells. Soon, they became my tools, my armor. Still, on the outside, I played my part: the poor widow, the cleaner, the woman nobody noticed. There was power in invisibility. No one questions a shadow. No one interrogates a ghost. While my daughter lied to her friends, pretending her mother worked in an office instead of cleaning it, I was quietly acquiring real estate under shell corporations. I was buying distressed companies that everyone else had written off. I was moving money through carefully built networks no one could trace. For 2 decades, I wore the same thrift store dresses, ate canned soup for dinner, and refused myself every luxury. I let Vanessa believe I was pathetic. I let her despise me. And in return, I built an empire worth more than she could ever spend in a lifetime. There were nights I cried quietly, sitting at my little secondhand desk, exhausted from both scrubbing floors and deciphering balance sheets. There were mornings when I watched my daughter slam the door, embarrassed by me, and I wondered if all the sacrifice was worth it. But then I would open my hidden bank statements, watch the numbers climb, and remind myself one day the truth will matter. The irony was almost cruel. The same daughter who sneered at my worthless life was about to marry into the Caldwell dynasty, believing she had finally risen above her humble beginnings. And yet, she had no idea that her mother, Margaret Hayes, the invisible maid, was the silent force now holding her new family's future in her hands. Richard Caldwell's company had been drowning, choking on lawsuits, debts, and broken contracts. He had signed the sale papers only 2 weeks earlier, relieved to rid himself of the sinking ship. He never knew the faceless buyer, only the name, M.J. Whitmore, a woman who never appeared in public, who never allowed her picture in magazines, who conducted every negotiation through lawyers and carefully disguised phone calls. And now, standing before me in that glittering ballroom, he finally realized the truth. I was no maid. I was no embarrassment. I was the woman who had saved his empire, the woman who had just become his boss. And while my daughter laughed at me, humiliating me in front of 200 guests, Richard Caldwell's face drained of color. Because in my silence, he heard the roar of revelation. For 30 years, I had been underestimated, overlooked, and discarded. But all along, I had been preparing for this moment, the night when the world would finally discover that the invisible woman was never invisible at all. The morning after the wedding, I expected silence. I expected to retreat into the familiar comfort of invisibility, to let the scandal of the night fade into polite gossip. But I had underestimated the dangerous spark of greed and suspicion that had been lit in Vanessa's eyes. For days, my phone buzzed with messages. At first, they came dressed in sweetness. "Mom, are you okay? You looked so nervous last night." Then came the probing questions. "Do you know Mr. Caldwell from before? Did you two ever meet at work?" By the end of the week, the desperation bled through. "I need to know the truth. What did Mr. Caldwell mean when he said you were his boss?" I didn't answer. I had learned long ago that silence was the most powerful weapon. Silence made people reveal themselves. Silence forced others to fill the empty space with their own fears, their own theories. By Tuesday evening, there was a sharp knock on my apartment door. I didn't need to check the peephole to know who it was. When I opened it, Vanessa stormed in, her ivory cashmere coat dripping rain onto my worn linoleum floor. She looked around my cramped living room, her lip curling in disgust at the thrift store sofa and peeling paint. "We need to talk," she announced, her voice brittle with suppressed panic. I motioned for her to sit, poured her tea into my chipped mugs, and waited. "Mr. Caldwell recognized you," she said finally, her eyes narrowing. "He called you his boss. That doesn't make sense. You're a janitor, Mom. You clean floors. So explain to me why a millionaire like him would say that to you in front of everyone." I took a slow sip of tea, letting the silence stretch until her foot tapped impatiently against the floor. "Maybe he mistook me for someone else," I offered softly. "People see what they want to see." Her eyes flashed. "Don't play games with me. I hired a private investigator." The words landed like a thunderclap. I set my cup down carefully, hiding the tremor in my hands. "A detective?" "Yes," she said, almost triumphantly. "And guess what? He found nothing. Nothing about this mysterious M.J. Whitmore who bought Caldwell Corporation. No photos, no public appearances. Just shell companies and lawyers. It's like she doesn't even exist. And yet, Mr. Caldwell swears he knows you. So what is it, Mom? Are you her maid? Her secretary? Did you work for her? Or..." Her voice dropped, heavy with suspicion. "Are you her?" I looked at my daughter then, really looked at her. Her designer shoes were soaked, her mascara streaked from the rain, but beneath the polished exterior was a child still clawing for certainty in a world she didn't understand. "Vanessa," I said quietly, Do you really believe that I, who spent my life cleaning offices and saving pennies, could secretly be a millionaire? Her jaw tightened. Yes, because I know you, Mom. You're stubborn, you're secretive, and you've been hiding something from me my entire life. I didn't answer. I let her drown in her own words. The following week, her visits became relentless. She showed up at midnight, at dawn, at random hours with flimsy excuses. I was in the neighborhood, or I forgot something at your place. I'd find her rifling through my bookshelves, skimming old receipts, peering into drawers when she thought I wasn't looking. One afternoon, I caught her sitting at my desk, my old shoebox of papers open in front of her. She jumped when I entered the room. I was just looking for a pen, she lied, her voice too quick. I said nothing, only walked over and closed the lid of the box with deliberate calm. She didn't know that the real documents, bank statements, corporate contracts, acquisition papers, were locked away in a safety deposit box downtown. What she had found were decoys, an altered bank slip showing a $300 deposit, a scribbled phone number that actually belonged to a pizza delivery place. Bait. Her paranoia grew with every false clue. By Friday, she arrived not alone, but with Andrew, her new husband. It was the first time he had set foot in my home. He looked uncomfortable, trying not to wrinkle his suit on my faded sofa. "Mrs. Hayes," he began politely, "Vanessa told me about the confusion at the wedding. My father hasn't stopped talking about you. He insists he's seen you before in a professional capacity. He even said he remembers your voice." Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "So tell us the truth, Mom. Were you working for MJ Whitmore? Did she pay you to keep quiet? Is that why Mr. Caldwell recognized you?" I folded my hands in my lap, forcing my voice to remain even. "Baines is a common name," I said simply. "If Mr. Caldwell wants to know more about his mysterious buyer, he can call his lawyers." "That's not good enough." Vanessa's voice cracked. "Do you understand what's at stake? We're drowning in debt, Mom. $600,000. Do you know what that means? The house, the cars, even the wedding. We're about to lose everything. And then Mr. Caldwell looks at you like you're the one holding all the cards. Do you know how insane that feels?" Her desperation poured into the room, raw and unfiltered. Andrew reached for her hand, his voice steadier, gentler. "Vanessa's just under a lot of stress. But if there's something you know, anything, that could help us understand why my father reacted the way he did, please, tell us." I studied the two of them. Andrew, kind but naive, still believing in honesty. Vanessa, frantic, torn between shame and greed, unwilling to let go of the possibility that her invisible mother was more than she appeared. I rose slowly, walked to the window, and looked out at the cracked streetlights and broken pavement of my neighborhood. "Imagine," I said softly, "that what Mr. Caldwell saw in me wasn't wealth, but memory. Imagine he confused me with a ghost from his past." When I turned back, Vanessa's face was pale, her eyes wide with suspicion. She didn't believe me, and that was exactly what I wanted. Because sometimes the most dangerous truth is not the one revealed. It's the one left dangling, half hidden, forcing others to destroy themselves trying to uncover it. By the third week after the wedding, I knew my silence alone was no longer enough. Vanessa had crossed the line from suspicion into obsession. She called me at all hours, sometimes crying, sometimes screaming, sometimes whispering, as though she were afraid someone might overhear her. "Tell me the truth, Mom," she begged one night, her voice ragged over the phone. "If you know something, if you are someone, please just say it. I'm losing my mind." But it wasn't her mind I was watching unravel. It was her mask. The carefully constructed facade of confidence and superiority she had worn for years was cracking. Beneath it was the raw desperation of a woman terrified of losing everything. It was time to set the trap. On a Friday afternoon, I called Vanessa. My voice was calm, measured, the way a surgeon steadies their hand before cutting. "I need you and Andrew to come by tomorrow night," I said. 7 o'clock sharp. Don't tell anyone, not even Richard Caldwell. What we discuss cannot leave this apartment." There was a long silence on the other end. Then a breathless, "Is this about the company, about who you really are?" "I'll explain everything tomorrow," I said, and hung up. When they arrived Saturday evening, Vanessa was dressed as if for an audience. Black silk dress, diamond earrings, heels clicking sharply against the hallway floor. Andrew wore a navy suit and tie, but his posture betrayed nerves. My apartment, humble as always, seemed to close in around their elegance, stripping away their illusions of superiority. I closed the curtains, locked the door, and set 3 chipped mugs of tea on the table. What we are about to discuss, I said softly, cannot leave these walls. If it does, it could ruin more lives than just ours. Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes gleaming like a predator scenting prey. From beneath my desk, I pulled out a slim folder. The paper inside was crisp, the ink freshly printed. Across the top, in bold letters, it read, Conditional Financial Transfer Agreement. Vanessa snatched the document before Andrew could react. Her eyes darted across the lines. Her lips moved as she read, then trembled. $800,000, she whispered. Mom, you're offering us $800,000? Andrew's head shot up. What? I folded my hands. Yes, enough to pay off your debts, plus a cushion to start over. But money of that size cannot be given freely. It requires conditions. Vanessa's breath came fast, shallow. What conditions? Read, I said. Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke aloud. Complete transfer of all current personal assets as collateral guarantee. She looked up, her brow furrowed. This means we'd have to sign over the house, the cars, everything. Temporarily, I explained, until you prove you can manage responsibility. Then it would be returned. Andrew's face darkened. That's insane. That leaves us completely at your mercy. What happens if something happens to you? What protection do we have? But Vanessa ignored him, already flipping to the next page. Her voice grew unsteady. Immediate relocation to a city of your choice, with limited family contact for 5 years. The words hung heavy in the air. Andrew's chair screeched as he pushed back. 5 years? Away from my family? From my job? Limited contact? That's not financial help. That's exile. I met his eyes evenly. Sometimes to start over, you must burn the bridges behind you. 5 years of discipline is a small price for freedom from debt. Vanessa's lips trembled. She whispered, Where would we live? In a modest home I would provide, with a monthly stipend of $4,000, enough to live comfortably but not lavishly. Her eyes flickered with calculation. Andrew buried his face in his hands. Vanessa's voice broke as she read the final clause. Voluntary renunciation of all future inheritance rights. She looked at me, horrified. You're saying if we sign this, we can never inherit anything from you? Exactly, I said. This would be your one and only benefit. After this, you are financially independent. Andrew shot to his feet, his voice shaking with outrage. This is not a loan. This is not help. This is a trap. You're asking us to sell our souls for money. But Vanessa clutched the paper like a lifeline. How much was it again? 800,000? Her husband's mouth fell open. Vanessa, are you even listening to yourself? The difference between them was glaring. Andrew saw the contract for what it was, a test of values disguised as generosity. Vanessa saw only numbers, salvation, survival. This could save us, she whispered urgently. It's only 5 years, Andrew. We'd still have each other. And after that, we'd be free. We could rebuild everything. Rebuild what? Andrew demanded. A life built on lies? Do you not see what's happening here? Your mother is testing us and you're failing. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. She turned to me, her voice breaking. Please, Mom, tell me this isn't just a trick. Tell me you're really offering this. We're drowning. I rose slowly, walked to the window, and let the silence stretch like a blade between us. Then I spoke, each word deliberate. Vanessa, for years you treated me as invisible. You humiliated me in front of strangers. Last week, you called me a fat so in front of 200 people. And now, suddenly, I am the most important person in your life, because of money. She flinched, her tears spilling freely. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. If I could take it back, I would. Please, give us this chance. Andrew's voice cracked with fury. Do you even hear yourself? You're willing to sell your dignity, our marriage, our family ties, for a contract that strips us of everything. This isn't salvation, it's bondage. I turned back to them, studying the woman my daughter had become and the man she had chosen to marry. Their reactions told me everything I needed to know. Andrew's integrity, Vanessa's greed. There is, I said softly, a fourth condition. They froze. It isn't written on paper, I continued. It's spoken, and it is this. Before you sign anything, before you receive a single dollar, I will tell you the truth about who I really am. And once you know, there is no going back. The room went utterly silent. Vanessa's breath hitched, Andrew's fists clenched, and I knew at last the game was ready to move into its most dangerous phase. The air inside my apartment grew so heavy it was almost suffocating. Vanessa clutched the contract with trembling hands, her knuckles white, her breath ragged. Andrew, by contrast, stood rigid, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with outrage. Between them, the space was filled with a silence sharp enough to cut glass. And then I spoke. "There is a fourth condition," I said quietly, "and it is this. Before you take a single cent, you must know who I really am." Vanessa's lips parted, a soundless gasp escaping her throat. Andrew's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low, wary. I walked to my desk, my old scratched desk, the one that had been my fortress during decades of exhaustion and secrecy. From the bottom drawer, I withdrew a thick folder, far heavier than it looked. I carried it to the table and set it down between us with deliberate weight. "This," I said, resting my palm on the folder, "is the truth." For a long moment, no one moved. Vanessa's eyes darted between the folder and my face, her body trembling as though her entire world depended on what was inside. At last, I opened it. The first page slid out, its heading bold and official: Purchase Agreement, Caldwell Corporation. Beneath it, in black ink, was a signature the two of them had never seen before, but Richard Caldwell had. Andrew leaned forward, his eyes scanning the page, his mouth falling open. 45 million, he whispered, reading the number. Vanessa's hands shook violently as she reached for the paper. "No," she breathed. "This can't be." I laid out more documents: bank statements, ownership certificates, corporate filings, all with the name MJ Whitmore. And yet, alongside them, photos. Photos of me. Some were grainy screenshots from video conferences. Others were corporate ID badges under aliases, but the face was unmistakably mine. "It can't be," Vanessa repeated, her voice cracking. "This isn't real. Mom, tell me this isn't real." Andrew pressed a hand over his mouth, his face pale. "Oh my God, you're her, you're Whitmore." I nodded once, slow, deliberate. "Yes, I am MJ Whitmore. I am the woman who bought your father's company, Andrew. I am the woman who built a financial empire while you, Vanessa, laughed at my shoes and despised my hands." The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa collapsed onto the sofa, her body folding in on itself as if the weight of the revelation had crushed her. Her tears streamed silently at first, then came with violent sobs. "All these years," she choked out, "all these years I thought you were nothing. I told people you were pathetic." Her voice broke entirely. "I called you a fat sow in front of everyone." Her shoulders shook uncontrollably. Andrew sat beside her, his hand on her back, but his own eyes remained locked on me. And for the first time, there was no condescension there, only awe and fear. "You live in this apartment," he said slowly, his voice trembling. "You wear thrift store clothes. You take buses. Why? Why hide this? Why let your daughter believe you were worthless?" I leaned back, folding my arms. "Because power grows in silence," I said. "Because invisibility gave me freedom. And because if people had known the truth, I never would have been left alone long enough to build what I did." I pulled another set of papers from the folder. These, unlike the purchase agreements, were written in my own name, Margaret Hayes, also known as MJ Whitmore. "This," I said, "is my will." Vanessa's breath caught. 70% of my fortune was once designated for charity, 30% for my only daughter and her future children. Her tear-filled eyes lifted, wide with fragile hope. "Was," I repeated coldly. "After your wedding, after your cruelty, I changed it. Now, 100% will go to charity, nothing to you." The words landed like bullets. Vanessa gasped, her body jerking as if struck. "No, no, please," she sobbed. "I don't care about the money. I swear I don't. I just—" She broke off, burying her face in her hands. Andrew turned to me, his voice shaking but firm. "Miss Whitmore, Margaret, whatever name you prefer, I can't defend what Vanessa said to you. It was cruel, unforgivable, but cutting her out entirely, your only child, does that really heal anything?" Vanessa fell to her knees in front of me, her tears staining the floor. "Mom, I'm begging you. I don't want your money anymore. I don't want the will. I just want you. Please don't cut me out of your life while you're still here." Her hands clutched at mine, trembling, desperate. For the first time in decades, I saw my daughter stripped bare, without arrogance, without malice, without armor. just a child pleading for love. I studied her face, the same face I had once kissed goodnight, the same eyes that had once looked at me with innocence before contempt replaced it, and I felt the conflict tear through me, because I wanted to believe her. But I had lived too long behind masks to know if what I saw was truth or performance. I pulled my hands away slowly, gathering the documents back into the folder. Forgiveness, I said softly, is not something earned in one night. It is something proven over years. You can say anything you like now, but words don't erase decades. Vanessa's sobs filled the room, raw and broken. Andrew lowered his head, his shoulders heavy with the weight of silence. I closed the folder with a snap. The truth is out. I am MJ Whitmore, and now you must decide. Will you see me as a mother or as a bank? Because if you choose the latter, you've already lost. The room went still, the weight of my words settling like stone. And in that stillness, I knew the game had shifted forever. The night after my confession, I barely slept. I sat by the window, the city lights flickering below like restless stars, and replayed Vanessa's face in my mind, tear-streaked, desperate, trembling as she clung to me. I wanted to believe she meant every word. I wanted to believe that for once she was speaking as my daughter and not as a woman blinded by greed. But decades of silence had hardened me. I had seen too many masks slip, too many smiles fade once money was gone. By morning, I resolved on one thing. I would not give her my trust so easily. Over the following week, Vanessa began calling me constantly. Sometimes her voice was sugar sweet, other times trembling with desperation. Mom, can we have lunch together? Mom, I just want to spend time with you. No money involved. Mom, please believe me. I'm not who I was at the wedding. But her timing betrayed her. She always called right after speaking with Andrew or after another notice from the bank about their drowning debts. One evening, I arrived home to find her waiting on the steps of my building. Her designer coat was soaked from the drizzle, her hair plastered to her cheeks. She looked less like the glamorous bride I had seen 2 weeks earlier, and more like a child lost in a storm. Mom, she whispered, grabbing my hand. I can't sleep. I keep seeing your face when Mr. Sterling recognized you. Please, please tell me what I have to do to make things right. I let her inside, but my silence was deliberate. Words were cheap. Unlike Vanessa, Andrew remained distant but respectful. 2 days later, he came alone to my apartment. He carried no designer gifts, no false charm, only a weary look. Mrs. Hayes, he began, using the name I had lived under for decades. I don't know what the truth is about your wealth. I don't care, really. But I do know one thing. My wife is drowning. And if there is any chance for her to repair what she's broken, it has to start with you. He hesitated, then added, I love her, but I won't let her destroy us chasing something that isn't hers. I studied him carefully. There was no greed in his eyes, only exhaustion and love. He was nothing like my daughter in that moment, and yet he was bound to her fate. That night, I made a decision. If Vanessa wanted forgiveness, she would have to earn it, not with words, but with action. I invited her to my apartment the following weekend. When she arrived, her face was puffy from crying, her nails chipped, her once glossy appearance fading. I'm giving you a chance, I told her, but it won't be easy. She leaned forward, her eyes wide, desperate. I'll do anything. Good. Then you'll start where I started. The next morning, I took her with me to one of the office buildings I had cleaned for years. At 5 a.m., she stood beside me, her designer sneakers squeaking on the polished floors, holding a mop for the first time in her life. Mom, you can't be serious, she whispered. I am, I said firmly. You called me a fat sow while I worked to survive. Now you will feel what it's like. Her hands blistered, her back ached, she complained, she cried, but she did not quit. By the end of the week, I saw something I had not seen in years. Humility. The transformation was not immediate. Vanessa fought every instinct she had, her pride, her vanity, her hunger for status. But each morning she returned, wearing plain clothes, no makeup, her hair tied back. One afternoon, while scrubbing a stairwell, she stopped and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. Mom, she said softly, I used to think you were invisible, but now I realize you were the strongest person in the room all along. And her voice cracked, I was blind. It wasn't a full apology, but it was the first honest sentence I had heard from her in years. Weeks passed. Slowly, she began to change. not in grand gestures, but in small details. She stopped wearing jewelry she couldn't afford. She sold her handbags. She started cooking cheap meals instead of dining out. One evening, she brought Andrew with her, carrying a stack of bills. "We've decided to sell the house," she said, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "We're moving into an apartment. We'll pay down the debts ourselves." "But Mom," she paused, looking directly at me, "I don't want to fix my life for money. I want to fix it for you." For the first time, I believed her. One Sunday morning, as we shared coffee in my tiny kitchen, Vanessa suddenly reached across the table and took my hands. "Mom," she whispered, "I can't change the past, but I want to change the future. Please let me try." Her grip was warm, trembling, human. Not greedy, not desperate, just real. And in that moment, my armor cracked. Tears blurred my vision. "You've hurt me more than anyone else ever could," I said softly. "But you're still my daughter, and maybe it's time I let myself believe in you again." Forgiveness was not sealed in a single moment. It would take months, maybe years of proof. But for the first time, I saw the possibility. That night, as Vanessa and Andrew left, I stood by the window and watched them walk down the street, hand in hand. For decades, I had lived in shadows, hiding behind false names and false poverty. But perhaps, just perhaps, the greatest wealth I had to give wasn't money. It was the chance for my daughter to learn the truth of resilience, humility, and love. And that, I realized, was a fortune no amount of money could ever replace. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I finally said the words that had been circling in my mind for weeks. Vanessa and Andrew were seated at my small kitchen table, sipping coffee from mismatched mugs, when I looked up and spoke. "Vanessa," I said slowly, "if you truly want forgiveness, you'll have to prove it, not just to me, but to everyone." She blinked, her hand tightening around the cup. "What do you mean?" I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. "You humiliated me in front of 200 people at your wedding. You called me names, mocked me, and let them all laugh. If you want to start rebuilding trust, you must apologize in front of those same people." Her breath caught. "You mean publicly?" "Yes," I said. "Publicly, in front of the family, the guests, Mr. Sterling, all of them." For a moment, silence hung in the room. Andrew's brows furrowed, concern written on his face. Vanessa's lips trembled, but to my surprise, she nodded. "If that's what it takes," she whispered, "I'll do it." The following week, Vanessa worked tirelessly to prepare. She wrote and rewrote her apology, pages crumpled and tossed aside as she struggled to find words that didn't sound rehearsed. One evening, she came to me with red-rimmed eyes. "Mom, I don't know how to do this. Every draft I write sounds fake. It sounds like I'm just begging for money." "Then stop writing it like an apology to me," I told her. "Write it as if you're speaking to yourself, to the girl you used to be, the one who despised her own mother. That's who you need to confront." She froze, tears spilling down her cheeks. Then she went home and rewrote everything. Andrew arranged a dinner at an upscale restaurant in Charlotte, the same city where the wedding had taken place. He invited the Sterling family, close friends, and nearly 100 of the guests who had been present that fateful night. When I walked into the room, I felt the weight of their eyes on me. Curious, suspicious, some even mocking still. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Why is she here? Isn't that the woman Vanessa humiliated?" I thought she was just a janitor. But this time I didn't shrink. I walked with my head high, my presence steady. Because tonight, the truth was no longer a secret. When the dinner was nearly over, Vanessa rose from her seat. Her hands trembled as she held a folded paper, but she didn't read from it. Instead, she set it aside and looked directly at the audience. "2 months ago," she began, her voice breaking, "I committed the worst sin a daughter can commit. I publicly humiliated my own mother. I called her names I can't even repeat without shame. I laughed while others laughed at her pain." A murmur went through the room. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. "My mother, Margaret Hayes, is the strongest woman I know. She raised me alone after my father died. She worked jobs most of you would never dream of, jobs that left her hands raw and her body aching. And while she was sacrificing everything for me, I was ashamed of her. I despised her." Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. "I can't take back what I said at my wedding, but I can stand here and tell you all that I was wrong. I was blind. I was cruel, and I am so deeply sorry." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't falter. She is not invisible. She is not worthless. She is my mother, and she is the most extraordinary woman I will ever know." The room was silent. Even Mr. Sterling's stern face softened, his eyes glistening. When Vanessa finished, she didn't look at me. She bowed her head, her shoulders trembling, and sat back down. The silence lingered for a moment longer. Then slowly applause began. First from Andrew, then from Mr. Sterling, and finally from the rest of the room. Not everyone clapped with enthusiasm, but enough did, and in that moment something shifted. Vanessa had walked through fire in front of the very people who once fueled her arrogance. She had shed her pride, her vanity, her mask, and though forgiveness wasn't automatic, respect began to grow where mockery once thrived. I didn't embrace her that night. I didn't say, "I forgive you." But as I watched her cry openly in front of strangers, taking the humiliation she once forced upon me and turning it into a weapon against herself, I felt the first true seed of change take root. She had chosen to break herself, not for money, not for appearances, but for me. And for the first time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to rebuild our bond from the ashes. 2 weeks after the public apology dinner, I called Vanessa. My voice was calm, measured, almost businesslike. "Meet me downtown," I said. "Whitmore Tower, 9th floor, Monday, 9 a.m." There was a long pause on the other end. "Whitmore Tower?" she whispered. "That's your headquarters." "Yes," I replied. "It's time you saw the world I built, the world you never imagined existed. But Vanessa, this isn't a gift. It's a test. Don't come expecting money. Come ready to work." "I'll be there," she said firmly, though I could hear the tremor in her voice. That Monday morning, she walked through the glass doors of Whitmore Tower. The lobby gleamed with marble floors and chandeliers, a world away from the cheap banquet halls she used to flaunt. Employees moved with quiet efficiency, greeting me as Miss Whitmore, while casting curious glances at the young woman beside me. Vanessa's heels clicked nervously as she followed me to the elevator. "I feel like I don't belong here," she murmured. "That's because you don't," I answered plainly. "Not yet." When the elevator doors opened, she stepped into a conference room lined with city views. On the table were stacks of documents, budgets, reports, charity applications. "This," I said, gesturing, "is the real work. Saving jobs, funding schools, deciding which struggling families eat and which don't. You wanted forgiveness? Earn it here." I handed her a folder labeled Community Housing Project Greensboro. "Read this," I instructed. "By Friday, I want a proposal on my desk recommending whether or not we fund it. No excuses." Her eyes widened as she flipped through the 50-page report filled with financial jargon. "Mom, I don't know the first thing about this." "Then learn," I said coldly. "I learned with nothing but old newspapers and overheard conversations. You have the internet, libraries, and me. No excuses." That week, Vanessa nearly drowned. She called me late at night, frustrated, confused. But she didn't quit. She spent hours in the public library, met with community leaders, even sat down with Andrew to run numbers she didn't understand. By Friday, she delivered a shaky but earnest 5-page proposal. It wasn't perfect, but it showed research, effort, and most importantly, humility. The following week, I took her to a shelter for abused women that my foundation supported. The building was modest, filled with children's laughter and women's tired but grateful smiles. As we walked through, Vanessa grew quiet. She bent down to tie the shoe of a little girl running past, then stayed to talk with a young mother who told her how the shelter had saved her life. That night, Vanessa whispered to me, "I used to think money was about handbags, cars, parties, but here, I see what it really means. It means survival, dignity, hope." For the first time, her words rang true. Over the next month, I gave her more tasks. She shadowed board meetings, wrote small reports, and even accompanied me to negotiations. Sometimes she failed miserably, blurting out naive comments or misreading people's intentions. But she kept returning, day after day, without complaint. One evening, after a grueling meeting, she looked at me with tired eyes. "Mom, I don't want your inheritance. I want your guidance. Teach me how to build something real." Her words hit me harder than any plea for money ever could. As spring arrived, I began to notice subtle changes. Vanessa no longer wore jewelry dripping with borrowed wealth. She came to the office in modest clothes, her hair tied back, her makeup minimal. When she spoke in meetings, she listened more than she talked. Andrew often waited for her outside, supportive but unobtrusive. I saw in him what I had begun to hope I'd see in her: quiet strength, respect, humility. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to imagine a future where my daughter could walk beside me, not as a spoiled child demanding what was hers, but as a woman learning to carry the weight of responsibility. That night, I wrote a note in my private journal. Perhaps forgiveness is not a single decision. Perhaps it is 1,000 small choices made every day to see the person in front of you, not who they were, but who they are becoming. For weeks, I carried the weight of a decision heavier than any corporate deal I'd ever signed. The document sat locked in my safe. My revised will, the one that stripped Vanessa of every inheritance and left everything to charity. It had been written in a moment of rage and humiliation, a response to the sharp sting of her cruelty. But now things had changed. Each day, I watched my daughter arrive at Whitmore Tower, not with entitlement, but with determination. Each evening, I saw her leave with weary eyes, her hands ink-stained from notes, her hair undone from hours of work. And every time I looked at her, the question gnawed at me: should I give her a second chance, not just as my daughter, but as my heir? One crisp Thursday morning, my board of directors summoned me for a private meeting. Miss Whitmore, my chief advisor, Mr. Langston, began carefully. "We've noticed your daughter's presence in the building. Some staff are whispering, assuming she is being groomed for succession." The room fell silent. Dozens of eyes fixed on me. "Is that true?" one asked. I folded my hands, weighing my words. "Vanessa is learning, but succession is not a right, it is earned." The board exchanged uneasy glances. "With respect," Mr. Langston said, "you've built an empire worth hundreds of millions. If something were to happen to you tomorrow, who would carry the vision forward? Your daughter? A charity board? Outsiders?" Their question echoed long after the meeting ended. For years, I had convinced myself the answer was simple: no one. But now, the possibility of passing the torch flickered faintly in my heart. The very next week, I witnessed something that shifted the ground beneath me. We were reviewing proposals for a new scholarship program. One application came from a young woman, barely 18, who had escaped an abusive household and dreamed of becoming a lawyer for children's rights. The board dismissed it as too risky, too emotional. But Vanessa, who had been silent most of the meeting, suddenly spoke up. "She deserves a chance," she said firmly. "You always told me, Mom, that wealth without compassion is just greed with prettier clothes. If we deny her, we're not protecting resources, we're killing her future." The room fell quiet. Even I was stunned. For the first time, I saw my daughter not as the spoiled girl who had mocked me, but as a woman willing to fight for someone else's dignity. And for the first time, I thought, maybe she's ready. That evening, I invited her to my penthouse. I poured 2 glasses of wine and set the old will and the new one on the table. "Vanessa," I said, my voice heavy, "there's something you need to see." Her eyes widened as she read the words. 70% to charity, 30% to her and her children. Then the revision, 100% to charity, nothing to Vanessa. She looked up at me, pale. "You really erased me." "Yes," I said coldly, "because you erased me first at your wedding, with every insult, every sneer, every moment you made me feel invisible." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't argue. She didn't beg. Instead, she nodded slowly. "You were right to cut me out," she whispered. "I don't deserve a penny of it. But, Mom, let me earn your trust back anyway, even if I never inherit a cent." Her words shook me more than any dramatic apology ever could. For days, I wrestled with her response. I replayed it again and again, searching for hidden motives, for greed disguised as humility. But every day she returned to the office, and every night she went home without asking for more. Finally, one late evening, I opened the safe and pulled out a fresh set of documents. This time, the will was different. 70% would still go to charity, as it always had, but the remaining 30%, not to Vanessa directly. Instead, it would go to the Whitmore Family Foundation, to be managed by her only under strict conditions: transparent audits, public accountability, and board oversight. It wasn't a gift. It was a responsibility, a burden, a test. And if she truly had changed, it would become her legacy. One Sunday, I placed the new will in front of her. Her hands trembled as she read. "This doesn't give me money," she said softly. "It gives me work." responsibility. Yes, I replied, and if you fail, it won't just be you who suffers. It will be every child, every family, every community depending on that foundation. Do you still want it? Her eyes lifted to mine, clear, steady, no trace of greed. Yes, she said simply, because for the first time in my life, I want to be more than just your daughter. I want to be worthy of your name. And in that moment, for the first time in decades, I felt something loosen inside me. Not full forgiveness, not yet, but hope, real, trembling hope. The morning Vanessa officially stepped into the role of managing the Whitmore Family Foundation, she walked into Whitmore Tower, not as my daughter, not as the girl who once sneered at my thrift store shoes, but as a woman carrying responsibility on her shoulders. The staff greeted her cautiously, unsure if she was just another heiress playing charity. But I watched her carefully that day. She didn't strut. She didn't demand. She listened. She asked questions. She stayed until the janitors turned off the lights, an irony not lost on me. That night, she called me. Her voice was trembling but steady. "Mom," she whispered, "this is harder than I thought, but I want to do it right. I want you to be proud of me." For the first time, I allowed myself to say it. I already am. 2 months later, the foundation faced its first major test. A grant had been promised to rebuild a school in South Carolina after a devastating storm. But complications arose. Contractors wanted bribes, the local council dragged its feet, and the media began circling, ready to expose the Whitmore Foundation as another corrupt institution. The board looked at me for direction, but I shook my head. "This is Vanessa's project. Let her handle it." Her face went pale. "Mom, what if I fail?" "Then you'll learn," I said simply. "But if you succeed, you'll know you deserve this." For the next 3 weeks, she worked tirelessly. She traveled to South Carolina, met with families, held town meetings, and refused every shady deal offered to her. When the contractors tried to blackmail her, she went straight to the press with the evidence, turning a potential scandal into a triumph of transparency. When the first brick of the school was laid, the children painted a sign, "Thank you, Whitmore Foundation." Vanessa stood beside me that day, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mom," she whispered, "I finally understand why you lived the way you did. It wasn't about money. It was about purpose." Word spread quickly. Newspapers that once printed gossip about the humiliated mother of the bride now published headlines praising Vanessa's courage. At a charity gala, Mr. Sterling himself raised a glass and said, "Mrs. Whitmore saved my company, but her daughter is proving she can save futures." The applause was genuine, not polite, and for the first time, Vanessa wasn't standing in my shadow, she was standing beside me. That night, after the gala, she came to my penthouse. We sat by the window, the city stretching endlessly beneath us. "Mom," she said quietly, "I don't deserve the chances you've given me, but I want you to know something." She took my hand, her grip firm, her eyes clear. "I don't want to inherit your money. I want to inherit your strength, your resilience, your heart. If I can carry even a piece of that forward, I'll consider my life a success." Tears pricked my eyes, but I didn't look away. For decades, I had hidden my heart behind contracts and corporate shields, but in that moment, I let them fall. "You already have, Vanessa," I whispered. "You already have." A month later, I returned to the lawyer's office with my will once again. I didn't erase the foundation clauses. I didn't change the percentages, but I added one line, written in my own hand. "To my daughter, Vanessa Hayes, I leave not only the Whitmore Family Foundation, but the hope that she continues the mission I began, to turn suffering into strength, invisibility into power, and mistakes into second chances." As I signed my name, I realized something profound. The fortune I had spent my life building would not be measured in millions. It would be measured in the redemption of a daughter I once thought lost forever. 6 months later, the school in South Carolina opened its doors. Vanessa stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, children swarming around her, parents weeping with gratitude. I watched from the crowd, not as MJ Whitmore, the powerful businesswoman, but as Margaret Hayes, a mother. When Vanessa cut the ribbon, the cheers rose like thunder. She turned, found me in the crowd, and mouthed 2 words I had waited decades to hear: "Thank you." And in that moment, all the scars, all the years of silence, all the humiliation melted into something greater. Not forgiveness, not revenge, but love, a love remade, tested in fire and stronger than money could ever buy.